For more on the economy in Europe, let's welcome over to the show Patrick Chamorel. He is a senior resident scholar at the Stanford Center here in Washington. Good to see you, sir. Let's talk about this interest rate hike because it's somewhat controversial. They didn't want to do it for the longest time. Now they decide that they are going to do it. What do you think changed their mind?
Well, it is just the picture of inflation, spreading all over Europe and rising. As far as the eye can see, of course, there is this understanding that if Europe gets into a recession, the inflation will come down. But right now, there's very high inflation in Europe, about the same level as in the United States, and of course, it's much higher outside of the Eurozone, both in Europe or in the United States, Canada, the UK, or the developing economies. So the ECB is, as you said, is way behind, starting very late in the process, starting from a very low threshold of negative interest rates. And so I think it was time to raise interest rates at this point, given the inflation landscape.
Do you think the weakness in the euro versus dollar had something to do with it? I mean, we've reported on it as well, and I got to think some of the exporters and the people who do all that international trade must have been looking at going, there's going to be a significant foreign exchange hit if we don't sort of catch up a little bit.
Well, yes, of course, the currency exchange rate does matter because as the dollar strengthened to the euro, inflation is being imported into Europe. So as you've noticed, most countries around the world have tried to strengthen their currencies to the dollar, which is very much in contrast with what used to be the case, which was a race to devaluation in the past, but now obviously it's a different game.
The issue that when we talk about inflation, here in the U.S., as you know, oil and gas, all that is a huge factor to us. Is it the same in Europe, or how is it different in Europe when they look at their inflation numbers versus when we look at it here in the U.S.?
Well, the core inflation without energy and food is about 5%, which is significant. But with it, of course, it's much higher. It's 8.6%. It really depends on each country in Europe because countries in Eastern Europe are on the front line, of course, having to face the price rises of Russian oil and gas. So those are very, very high inflation rate, around 20%, like in the Baltic states. But in the Eurozone itself, it's much less, about the same as in the United States. So it's not the difference is not really between Europe, I mean the EU and the Eurozone especially, and the United States. It's between both the United States and the Eurozone on one hand, and then other countries in Europe or outside of Europe.
Typically, when a central bank increases or decreases rates, it has either a stimulating or deflationary sort of impact on the overall economy. We've got the conflict in Ukraine having a negative impact on Europe, and while at the same time, the ECB wants to raise rates, so that would be essentially a double negative. Usually you'd see sort of the opposite take place. Walk us through the decision-making process on this and ultimately the impact.
You usually don't want interest rate hikes, when your economy is about to go into recession or is in recession. So, but in this case, of course, the ECB has been very careful not to raise interest rates until today, actually, and again, it's only getting to zero interest rates. So that's still very low, by any international comparison. Well, we had a trade-off today. Yes, the ECB raised interest rates and raised it by 0.5 percentage point, even though only a 0.25 percentage point was expected. But at the same time, they created this new mechanism, which is called anti-fragmentation, which allows, which will constrain, the spread between the countries that have very high bond yields and others that have low bond yields. Basically, the typical spread is between Germany and Italy, and that spread is about 2%. It has increased today just a little bit by 0.30%, but that's not very big, because Italy is also reassured in the midst of its political crisis that the ECB
Right.
will be behind it.
Patrick, thank you for explaining to us the sort of complexities, if you will, of the different countries and how the ECB rate hike will ultimately affect them. Of course, we have our interest rate hike later on next week. We'll see what happens there. So much to talk about. Patrick, thank you very much for joining us from Washington, D.C.